A toxic relationship ends in a gruesome murder. Police say a man shot his girlfriend in the head as they were riding in his car, killing her while she was in the passenger seat. The boyfriend then allegedly kept driving around Las Vegas for more than an hour and a half with her body in the car until he crashed and police discovered what happened. It's hard to believe the details of this case that we're following out of Las Vegas, and we just got our first look at the suspect as he made his first court appearance. He is the on-again, off-again boyfriend of the victim in this case. Here's a picture of him. His name, Julio Machado Vasquez. This is the first image we have of him from local news station KLAS since the alleged crime as he made his first court appearance. I'll tell you what's expected to happen next in this case, but first let me get you caught up to speed on what police say took place earlier this month in Las Vegas. Police put out this release with some details of what happened. They say they received a call on January 19th from someone who said their friend shot their girlfriend and were still driving around Las Vegas with their body in the car. They provided officers the description of a Ford Mustang. KLAS TV obtained the police report which detailed the specifics. Let me lay those out for you. It says that Machado Vasquez was driving his girlfriend Giselle Celine Perez in his Mustang and the two began arguing. He claims that Perez grabbed his handgun during the argument and he grabbed it back and held it to his own head, saying, "If you're going to do it right," trying to test her. He claims the safety was on, but then things went from bad to worse. Vasquez then told police the gun went off randomly, shooting Perez in the head, killing her. Police say he drove around Las Vegas for an hour and a half with her body in the car. Vasquez allegedly called an acquaintance and claimed what happened was an accident, and he said he was afraid to bring Perez to the hospital. And the next detail in this case is very disturbing. The acquaintance claims that Vasquez asked her to meet him in the desert to get rid of Perez's body. That acquaintance, though, called 911 and gave authorities the description of the Mustang that Vasquez was driving. Police say once they found that Mustang, he tried to flee and caused a crash, and that's when all of this came to an end. Our writers at lawandcrime.com spoke with one of Perez's friends who said that Perez and Vasquez were in a toxic relationship that was on again and off again since their high school days, which was more than 5 years ago. We found this GoFundMe page that's still live and it's still raising money right now, more than $16,000 for Perez's funeral expenses. This is a tragic case of domestic violence and a young woman lost her life. As for the suspect, Vasquez was hospitalized with injuries from that crash, but he just made his first court appearance. Here are those images once again per KLAS TV, and you can see he was in a wheelchair and still recovering. Joining us now is victims' rights advocate and former prosecutor Elizabeth Parker. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. I know you have a lot of experience when it comes to these cases of domestic violence. Just a horrific story out of Las Vegas. What stands out to you about the relationship between the suspect and the victim in this case? A friend described it as toxic. I think many of us could see that, but as an expert in this space, what do you see?
I mean, there are so many classic signs of her being a domestic violence victim for quite a while. Friends, as you said, described the relationship as extremely toxic. But it was sad for me to read some reports of his controlling, threatening behavior. One of her friends describes many incidents of prior stalking, of threatening behavior towards the victim, Perez, harassment. There was an incident, it sounds like back in November, just 2 short months prior to this homicide, where Vasquez was reported to have threatened Perez with a gun. Those are telltale signs as what is going to occur. And one other report that I read was that Perez had also installed cameras outside her home to protect herself and to kind of monitor the behavior of Vasquez. So that's all very telling signs of her being a significant, scared, terrified victim of domestic violence. And it sounds like it had been going on for quite a while. And what's interesting to me is, if this is what her family and friends knew and saw and described this relationship as toxic, can you only imagine what goes on behind closed doors that the family and friends don't see or know of? So This must have been a very, very scary situation for Perez.
And they were on again, off again in this relationship since their high school days. And still, as this story happened, I mean, they're still young kids; they're in their mid 20s. How does it get to this point? I guess that's the thing I wonder. Is like you could be in a relationship with someone, and emotions run high. Like we've all been there, but like to get to the point where this happens, how does it get to this point?
It's really interesting because violence against women and domestic violence, it's present worldwide. It doesn't matter the race, the religion, the class, the sex. But there's many patterns that emerge before it gets to intimate partner homicide, which is what we have here. And over the years, you can see this pattern, and we refer to kind of a lethality checklist that you see. And one of the most dangerous times, and we don't really know the ins and outs of the relationship other than the on again, off again, but when the victim's attempting to leave the relationship, that is the most dangerous time for any victim. Use of a gun in the past, that increases the risk that serious harm or death is going to happen, that it will be inflicted. Prior threats to kill, that's another one. If you see that ever, that is a sure pointer that lethality is on the horizon. Obsession with the victim. You often hear the phrase, "If I can't have you, no one else will." This statement is so often said and so often heard in these intimate partner violence situations. Monitoring of the victim, surveillance of the victim, prior incidents of stalking, and progressive violence that is more frequent and worsens over time, and intense jealousy and possessiveness. When people see any of these signs, it is almost certain that lethality is on the horizon. And whether or not a perpetrator actually does commit homicide, it's certainly in their mind, and they are certainly capable of it when you see these things happening.
Why is it so difficult for victims to get away? Because those on the outside will look and say, if you're installing cameras outside your house, you've had cases of stalking with somebody in the past, that this isn't the type of person that you would want to go for a car ride with or be in a relationship with. And yet, we've seen so many cases where it is so difficult for victims to walk away from toxic situations.
So much of it is the cycle of violence, and these situations go on for so long that it really kind of becomes almost a new normal for the victim. But they're always isolated, oftentimes from their friends and family. And victims in these situations, they often underestimate the danger that they believe they're in, the danger that they can handle. And they don't want to expose their friends and family to, sometimes there's threats against friends and family if they get involved. They don't want to expose them to any danger. But it is very, very difficult to leave these situations because there is such a fear that of the threats, of the violence, of the intimate partner making good on what they say they're going to do. And then you have oftentimes like these honeymoon phases right after you have an incident of domestic violence where everything's wonderful, and the perpetrator is apologizing and maybe bringing presents, and "I'll never do it again, and I'm going to change, and I promise this won't happen." And there's this belief for a short period of time until they begin to walk on eggshells again, and the pattern repeats itself. So it sounds like here this relationship was deteriorating, and she may have been trying to get out and didn't know how to do it safely, maybe didn't have the resources or support because she wasn't reaching out, and she thought she could handle it on her own.
And I think two of those previous cases, and we've seen cases. I talked about one last week about a woman in Oklahoma where her estranged husband, though she had protective orders out against him in an effort to protect herself and protect her children, he still came to the home with a gun, and he ends up dying in a shootout with police after killing one of the children. And I think of in this case, you have these previous moments of stalking and guns were involved. I mean, what can the legal system do to protect a victim prior to it getting to the point where now, with a guilty verdict, Vasquez won't be free ever again, but the damage has been done and she's lost her life.
It really is so difficult. Like you were talking about the Oklahoma case. I mean, so there's a piece of paper, a court order that's protecting the victim, and someone that wants to kill the victim, that doesn't care about their life, is willing to shoot a child and is willing to kill themselves or get caught, death by law enforcement. They don't care about that piece of paper, so what is so important is that law enforcement is able to intercede physically and get the victim to safety. And I think what's also really important is that the public become educated and they could recognize abuse, because women who are being abused don't automatically tell anybody about it. There's so much shame, there's so much guilt, there's embarrassment, they're fearful, they don't want anyone else involved in what they see as maybe a hopeless situation. So, more people need to trust their gut. More people need to contact law enforcement and try to intercede, come up with a safety plan, support these women that are victims of domestic violence and get them safe and get them in a safe place, get them away from these violent perpetrators. I know it's easy to say, but it's something that we all need to do, because probably there's someone in each of our lives that is a victim of domestic violence. And if we look for the signs, we may be able to see them.
As a former prosecutor, I know you've prosecuted cases like this, and I'm by no means a profiling expert, but I think about how he is accused of shooting her in the car, or he says it was an accident, but this gun goes off and she loses her life. And instead of going to the hospital, which you think if you had cared for somebody that you would want to take that person to the hospital in that situation, he ends up calling a friend or an acquaintance and then tries to argue it was an accident. Let's go hide the body. And it just sticks out to me that this was someone who was in it for himself the entire time. What do you make of the profile of this person based off what he's accused of doing?
Based upon everything that's been reported about him, he's the typical profile of a domestic violence perpetrator, an intimate partner homicide. Like you said, he's controlling the situation. He's calculating. There's so many things about his defense that fall apart to me. He tells his friend on the phone it's an accident, but he couldn't articulate or describe how he ended up shooting her in the back of the head. Without having access to the crime scene reports or the autopsy, what I can tell you is that there will be physical evidence in that car that will disprove his version of events. Vasquez states on the phone, as you said, to his friend, how it happened, but there'd be gunshot residue. There'd be the trajectory of the bullet. There'd be the angle it entered into, the distance that he was from her. There'd be blood spatter. So his actions in the shooting certainly do not support his version of events. He drove around for over an hour and a half after shooting her with him in his car. I mean, if this is an accident, wouldn't you get medical attention and not be concerned you'd be caught on the cameras of the hospital? Wouldn't you do anything possible to save your loved one? Wouldn't you, you certainly wouldn't call your friend and ask them to help you bury the body. And he wasn't very smart. I mean, I want to see his phone records, his GPS records, to see what he was doing in that hour and a half. How many other people did he call first to see if they would help him bury the body? You have to have a pretty good friend that's going to be accessory to murder after the fact. So, and then when the police try to pull him over, he leads them on a high-speed chase and ends up injuring and crashing into another car. So, my closing argument as a prosecutor on this case is, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this wasn't an accident. This wasn't an accident. This was intentional. This is consciousness of guilt. Everything he did shows he's guilty, and he knew it.
What do you think his criminal defense, though? What is his criminal defense look like in this case? Knowing that if you're a prosecutor, you have a lot of evidence here. This was a toxic relationship. Certainly, the physical evidence in the car is something that would hurt his case that it was an accident. How does he defend himself?
I mean, I think he's stuck with the statement that he made. I mean, I don't know if he made any statements to law enforcement that are consistent with, he told his friend on the phone, but that's an admission of guilt. So, he's got to stick with this was an accident. And I don't know how he's going to support that. Are they going to bring in some sort of firearms expert to say the gun mistakenly went off? Why does he have the gun out to begin with? Why are they even, he admits they're arguing. Why does he have a gun? Why does he have it out? I don't know anything about his past. Is he a convicted felon? Is he even allowed to be carrying a gun? So I think it'll be interesting to see how he supports that defense, but he's pretty locked into this was an accident and, somehow I shot her in the back of the head. I mean, she has to be turned away from him for him to shoot her in the back of the head. So was she trying to get out of the car? And he wasn't going to let her go. And again, this is, if I can't have you, nobody will. She's trying to break up with him. Maybe she's trying to get out of the car as the car is moving because she felt that was safer than being in the car with him threatening her with a gun. I think some of that remains to be seen, but he's locked in to that this was an accident, and I don't know how he's going to prove that.
Yeah, we'll see what he tries to do. It's just such a horrific and sad story that this young girl lost her life. Elizabeth, as someone who's prosecuted these cases, and you talk about the stigma, some of the telltale signs after the fact that people notice, and I'm sure there are going to be people who say, I wish I could have just stopped this from happening, could have done more to get this relationship to be over, to get this victim away from this boyfriend. And it's easy to say that more needs to be done to break all of that. But from your experience, what can actually be done to prevent cases like this one we're following out of Las Vegas?
There are so many resources out there for victims of domestic violence. I think if you know someone that is a victim, talk to them, tell them about your concerns, explain to them it's not their fault, because oftentimes they do think that they're at fault. Encourage them not to confront the partner if they are planning on leaving, and make a communications plan. Encourage them to maybe pack a bag that they can quickly leave with, and identify where they can go that will be safe, and develop a safety plan. There's many resources. But again, if you know this is happening, don't ignore it. Take action, because you may be the only one that does. Trust your gut and try to help these victims as much as you possibly can in the safest way, so that no one's put at risk. But law enforcement is there to help. There are so many resources out there that can help these victims, and oftentimes it's just support and that push that they need from a loving friend, family member, and coworker.
Yeah, because in this case, I'm sure many people will look at it and say, well, this was a blatant case of domestic violence. It was obvious to anybody who knew these people they shouldn't be together, and that this was an abusive relationship. How often is it less than that publicly, where it might just be something, a little thing you may notice in a relationship between people that can escalate into something like this? And I guess I'm just more asking for people who think what we're seeing in Las Vegas, that this is something that would never happen in their circle of friends or acquaintances.
I think if all of us are honest, you see the signs. You see, even if you see something as little as the personality change when someone starts to date a new person. Is she different around that particular person than you've ever seen her act before? Something like she can't make decisions anymore, or she seems to be scared to make a decision, or she becomes quiet and withdrawn. Even little signs like that, those are signs that someone may be in a relationship that they are a victim of domestic violence. I just think we need to be much more vigilant and not scared to have those hard and difficult conversations, because I think the more that this becomes a collective effort of the community, a collective effort of friends, families, and coworkers, I think we can change the conversation. I so often have taught law enforcement officers about how to investigate domestic violence cases when the victims won't cooperate, because that's where a lot of these cases fall apart, when they're not quite at the intimate partner violence, but say it's the first time he hits her, the second time, the third time, and the victims don't want to cooperate, and law enforcement gets a little sour and having to continue to respond on these cases. And I always start off my lectures and my teaching with, what's the one question that you ask? And it's, well, why won't she leave? Why won't she leave? And by the end of my lecture, I have law enforcement thinking it's, why does he continue to hit her? We have to change the conversation. We have to change the understanding of, these victims are in this situation and they feel trapped. They feel they can't get out and they need that help. So it's not the blame on the victims. It's always got to be the blame on the perpetrator. And I think once we can start to change that mindset and to try to understand from the perspective of the victim, we can make a difference, and we can start to end some of this cycle of violence and end some of these horrific, tragic cases that we're seeing every single week in the news.
Yeah, and it's so important to note that though this story has grabbed a lot of attention because of some of the horrific details that came with it. I mean, there's always, it seems, a story like this in the news cycle, and even less, just more of what you see if you look at a booking blotter. Certainly, I know you're in the state of Florida, where you can often see, who was arrested overnight. There's always, it seems, I remember from when I worked in Florida, a domestic case that doesn't grab headlines, but it's important to talk about. Victims' rights advocate, former prosecutor, Elizabeth Parker, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Court documents that we looked at show that Vasquez is being held without bond. For Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.